Hi, I'm Victoria Bassett, and I'm doing a book review for this book, Boys and Girls Learn Differently. It's a guide for teachers and parents. It was written by Michael Gurian and Kathy Stevens. In this book, the authors argue that boys and girls do indeed learn differently, and thus we need to be teaching them differently. They argue that this is a result of biological differences in the brain. Their argument not only supports adjusting our educational experiences to accommodate gender differences, but also to adjust those same educational experiences to accommodate each individual child, similar to the arguments that Howard Gardner makes in his multiple intelligences theory. This presentation will focus on the differences presented between the male and female brains. I will also tell you what Gurian and Stevens say about the learning differences between boys and girls. Lastly, I will share some teaching strategies that the book encourages for early childhood educators specifically. Although the book also presents teaching strategies for the elementary, middle, and high school levels, because this is an early childhood environment, that's what I will focus on. As far as brain differences go, there are quite a few that the authors presented. There were 6 pages on a table of differences and similarities between the male and female brains. I chose to highlight a few. The first is that the amygdala tends to be slightly larger in boys because this is connected to the emotional processing for fear and anger. It is believed that this is one reason why boys can become more aggressive than girls. The brainstem also tends to be more at rest in males. Because this is responsible for the fight or flight response, it is believed that this explains why boys may respond physically when they feel threatened or they're emotionally stressed. The Broca's area appears to be generally more active in females. Since this area is responsible for speech, the formation of words, and grammar, it is believed that this is why girls often have greater verbal skills, or at least one reason. Females also have to tend to have more neural connections within their cerebral cortex, and this promotes intellectual function, memory, and sensory interpretation. This is why Gurian and Stevens believe that girls may respond quicker in a classroom, or may they be able to process their information a little bit faster than boys, or even multitask. Females also tend to have more estrogen than boys, and this can reduce the feelings of competitiveness, aggressive assertion, and even self-reliance. Whereas boys tend to have more testosterone, which tends to increase those 4 things. Boys and girls learn different ways, and the authors argue that this is in large part due to the differences within their brain. Several ways that the authors point out that boys and girls learn differently are as follows. Boys tend to use deductive reasoning while girls use inductive reasoning to learn. Boys can use abstract reasoning while girls use concrete reasoning. Girls tend to use more words in their learning process than boys. Girls tend to use logic while boys need more evidence in order to learn. Boys become bored more often than girls and thus need further stimulation to stay interested in the topic. Boys need more space than girls. Evidence is, if you've ever been in a preschool classroom and it's at snack time, you'll see that one boy will take up 3 spots with his snack perhaps, and while the one girl next to him might just take up very little spot in front of her. I see this in my classroom all the time. Boys prefer pictures while girls prefer words and being talked to learn. Boys focus on the task at hand while girls are able to both focus on the task and be aware of those around her and the needs that they have. While this is the differences that Gurian and Stevens presented between boys and girls, I feel that these differences cannot be that generalized. I think that they are the differences between each individual child, which leads me to my next area of talking about is how it's related to Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences theory. It is my belief that the authors while the authors also relate their findings to Gardner's theory, I feel that although they introduce the idea of the individual child early in the book, they do not continue with that and tend to distinguish based on gender and generalizations. And I feel that a lot of the descriptions of girls that they've given, I've seen boys behaving the same way, and the same with the way some of the descriptions. I have a girl in my class who has very boyish traits. And it's very interesting when you look at the individual differences and how they learn. I think that's the more important thing to gain from this book, is how children differ, period. not necessarily relevant to their gender. As a result, I think that Gardner's multiple intelligences theory supports this claim that the authors make in treating the children as individuals, and also mine in going further, that has less to do with gender and just more of them being able to be in their competencies according to Gardner's intelligences. He proposed 10 different intelligences. Initially it was 7, 3 were added later. The first being interpersonal, and this is being able to understand one's own feelings. The next is interpersonal, and the ability to read the feelings and moods and intentions of other individuals. Spatial is another, where it is about the ability to view the visual and spatial world around you and able to perceive it correctly. Then there's bodily kinesthetic, the ability to use fine and gross motor skills effectively to manipulate things in your body to do things you want them to do. For instance, if you want to climb the rock climbing wall on the playground, you're able to use your body to skills that you've acquired to do that. Musical awareness is that, or the musical intelligence is that which recognizes things like pitch and rhythm and can often use that as a way to learn as well. Linguistic is more the sensitivity or understanding of words. Logical and mathematical is the ability to use patterns, categories, relationships. So, child being able to form a pattern, being able to categorize based on size or shape or color in this early childhood education environment. There's also the new ones, which are naturalists, being able to see the distinctions in the natural world. There's the spiritual, which is the ability to relate to the mysteries of life and death and sort of understanding how that fits in. And then sort of an expansion on spiritual is the existential one, which of course I'm having trouble pronouncing, but it's simply put kind of the exploration of the meaning of life beyond the spiritual intelligence. Because Gardner believed that all of these things are related to learning and development of individuals, it's important to recognize the strengths and weaknesses within these areas while developing an educational plan for a particular student or group of students. You can look at their differences based on what Gurian and Stevens point out between the genders and apply that to each individual child using these intelligences, and then better able to plan for that class or group of children that you're teaching. These intelligences that I mentioned by Gardner are the basis of the areas in which Gurian noticed the differences between the children and the genders. When teaching boys and girls, Gardner and Stevens present many different strategies. They recommend when teaching with boys to use beading games or lacing tools to increase fine motor skills, because they argue that boys tend to be behind in fine motor skills. They feel like putting books in different places in the classroom and having them in 2 or 3 different places instead of just one will get the boys to encourage them to appreciate and enjoy reading more just by having them available in more spots. Using hands-on learning activities are vital according to Gurian and Stevens. They recommend, though, with boys to give very, very brief instructions, less than a minute total, very to the point. They also suggested having some sort of feeling activity. In the book, they gave the example of a board with balloons and either the word sad or a sad face and different feelings to go with it. And when they're feeling sad or angry, they can go to that balloon and pop it as a way of initiating an action that they can use to express their feelings, but also then a way to start a conversation with the educators in the room. They also think it is vital to enjoy the energy that boys bring to the classroom, and I agree with this. Having boys myself and teaching boys for several years now, you have to embrace the energy that they bring, and I agree with them in this statement. I also have some girls who share their similar energy levels, and you have to embrace that and really encourage them to use it in a positive manner. Another thing that they recommend in a lot of classrooms, a lot of boys do not have male figures at home, and so it's important to bring in males to the classroom as field trip presenters or other mentoring opportunities to read to the children or whatever, to encourage that role model, that positive male behavior for them. In teaching girls, there are some similar strategies used. For instance, girls tend to be a little further behind in gross motor skills, so they recommend using games involving balls or other movement tools to get the girls to work on more their gross motor development. They also recommend taking pictures and having those out and to refer to when child has learning successes, especially the girls who might have a little less concept of self-esteem or self-confidence. They encourage the hands-on learning activities with girls too, but more in the realms of science and using manipulatives with mathematics. They feel like that's a better way for girls to learn those particular topics. They thought puzzles were a great way to promote perceptual learning. And they said that girls in particular need generous amounts of praise in the classroom when they do well. And again, to relate that back to their self-esteem building. And that's one way. That's ways that they recommend implementing targeting gender differences and, in my opinion, individual differences in the classroom. Something else that they recommended, boys in particular often have a sense of lack of attachment to particular teachers or a classroom, and by personalizing their personal space, like their cubby or their desk if they have one, that can help them form that attachment. As part of my project, we were required to do a visual aid, and what I did is I made a simple brochure that's informational that early childhood educators can use as a brief introduction to these concepts of differences between boys and girls. This is the front cover. I did list the title of the book and the authors, and I wrote that it was a review by myself as a student. When you open the brochure, the first page you see are the quick bulleted points of learning differences between boys and girls. I think that this is important, and it gives a very brief rundown of the same things that I just expressed, the deductive versus inductive reasoning and those sorts of things. Then you open it up more fully, and the full open brochure talks about the purpose of the book by the authors to continue the debate on boys and girls in education, and some different ways you can implement teaching strategies that I just highlighted to teach boys and to teach girls in the classroom. It's very quick. On the very back page of the brochure, I did put a brief mention of the different learning intelligences, and that my view of the book after reading it is that not only are boys and girls different, but every child is different and should be educated in a way that enhances their ability to learn based on their individual learning competencies. And it's not just differences between boys and girls, it's different from child A to child B to child C, regardless of their actual gender. It's just their proclivities. I hope you enjoy reading my full report, and the book was very interesting. I highly recommend it for educators in general. It's written in such a way that you can read just the areas of interest to you, not the entire thing, although I did read the entire thing as I have children of my own who are late elementary and middle school age and soon entering high school, and so I thought it would be informational from a perspective as a parent as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.